Okay, so this is the second little tutorial on pivot tables. I'm just going to tell you a few other bits and pieces about pivot tables. So I'm just setting up my data in a table again, because I've started with my data from scratch, and then I'm going to insert pivot table, putting it on a new sheet, and then let's just make our pivot table with a few bits of information. So let's put our reps on and our profit and our units, say. Okay, so one of the things that we can do with pivot tables, which is quite useful, is that we can filter them. We can filter them using this area of the pivot table down here, but we can also filter them in a quite straightforward way by using what's called the slicer. So within the Analyze tab, you can go to Insert Slicer, and then we can pick some things to slice it on. So let's just pick, let's pick reps, let's pick region. You can pick things that aren't necessarily, you can pick fields that aren't included in your particular pivot table as well, which is quite useful. So let's just put those two. And it comes up with these little boxes that you can move around. I can make that one a little bit smaller if you want to. What that allows us to do is, if we're interested in just particular employees, say, so how Morgan is doing, we can just pick on Morgan and it filters it for Morgan. If we're interested in Howard, we can just click on that and it tells us about Howard. If we're interested in a couple of them, we can highlight those, and again it just comes up in our pivot table. So basically it's a way for us to filter our pivot table quite easily. And even though region, for instance, isn't on this pivot table, if we pressed central there, then we can see just what people have made in terms of profit and how many units they've sold just in the central region. So if you want to just have a look at the West, we can have a look here, and it automatically says actually only those reps sold in the West. So if you wanted to see, well, how much did Jill sell in the West, then it pops up like that. So these slicers are a way that basically we can very quickly and easily kind of filter our table. So let's get rid of those and kind of go back to our pivot table. What we've also, that was in Analyze and then Insert Slicer. What we've also got is this tab which is Design, which is quite a useful one, and we can pick particular options along the top here for how we want to display our pivot table in terms of presentation. If you click on that drop down arrow, it gives us lots of other options, so we could go for maybe I don't know, a nice little green table like that. So this is quite a good one just to have an explore and look at different options for displaying the table, which is useful if you want to insert these tables into particular reports or whatever. We've also got some things up here which are quite good. So let me just put another option on my pivot table. So I've just added on regions as well. If you go to report layout, you can either show it in a compact form or show it in an outline form like that. So different, again, presentations for how to do it. In terms of our subtotals, for instance, we can show all subtotals at the bottom of the group. We can show subtotals at the top of the group. If we would, I think that's the default position. We can have no grand totals off for rows and columns, or we could have them on for rows only, on for columns only. So there's these different choices for our totals, our grand totals and our subtotals, and different choices for our report layout. What we've also got within this the Analyze tab, which might be useful, is this field settings, where we can change things within our pivot table. So for instance, you can add a particular item more than once. So if I put units again, what I can do is go into field settings, and then I can say, well, rather I want to show this as, for instance, a percentage of the grand total, say, and I want to call it percentage of units sold. So I've labelled this, and I've now shown, I've got all of my percentages of units sold included there in my pivot table. I might want to, these are in units, these are in, if we want to perhaps change, if we go into number format percentage, we can just change that actually to 0 decimal places, because it's a little bit, there we go, looks a little bit neater like that. With, you know, in the same sort of way, for my sum of profit column here, if I go to field settings, I can go to number format and change that, for instance, into currency, no decimal places, and that will show those as currency, which again looks a bit better. Those aren't in currency, that's a number of units, and that's in percentages, so that's what we want. So with this field settings part of the analyze is quite useful as well. So that's just very quickly told you a little bit about the slicer, a little bit about changing the design, and a bit of some of the things we can do changing things within field settings for pivot tables. Okay.